The Alliance, proudly brought to you by Visi. Packaging for the food and beverage industries to keep our supermarkets open.
For more than 100 years, Australia and the United States have fought alongside one another. Brothers in arms since World War I, our nations share a great deal more than the white stars proudly stitched on our national flags. We might be separated by the world's largest ocean, but there's so much that brings us together.
On land, at sea and in the air. In Part 3, we look at how the military partnership with our great ally underpins our national security.
With stability comes prosperity.
We are witnessing a dramatic increase in tension in our region. The pandemic a clear and present danger, and China's behaviour disturbing. The crackdown in Hong Kong, its use of hard and soft power in the South China Sea and the South Pacific. This is a time to be really clear about our values and just who to trust. And this is the reason for the alliance. September 11, 2001. A day in history we will never forget. The terrorist attacks on the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York and on the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. had an immediate and devastating impact on America, changing the world as we knew it forever.
There has never been a greater attack on the United States of America, and our loss of human life was significant and profound.
Our own Prime Minister, John Howard, was in Washington at the time of the attacks, there to celebrate the 50 years of the alliance.
Well, I'd originally gone to Washington to mark the 50th anniversary of the ANZUS Treaty. And the day before, it's on the 10th of September, I met President George W. Bush for the first time. I talked to him about the world situation. Neither of us had any idea of what was going to happen the following day.
John Howard was preparing for a news conference when his media advisor informed him that an aircraft had crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center.
About 10 minutes later, he came banging on the door. He said, another plane's hit the other tower. This is no accident. So I flicked on the television, and of course, I was confronted with those never-to-be-forgotten horrible images of the Twin Towers.
It was then that John Howard took the unprecedented decision to invoke the 1951 ANZUS Treaty. Arthur Sinodinos was John Howard's chief of staff at the time.
So it was a way of us showing practically to the Americans that we take the alliance seriously. We're prepared to invoke these formal mechanisms which then have other consequences.
Now, people might think, well, was a disproportionality and all of that, but actually there wasn't.
Prime Minister Howard recognized the criticality of that important moment, and recognizing the power of that treaty, it was another touchstone that Americans recognized our friendship and that we were in great need at the moment. And so God bless John Howard.
People never forget what happened here on home soil. Australians too were caught up in the terror, many of them working here in New York in financial services. Back in Australia, people lost friends and colleagues. Australia's show of support in the wake of 9/11 took the relationship to a new level.
Howard and Bush bonded in a different way. They bonded as brothers in arms. And Howard then declared that the attack on America was an act of war. He said it was worse than Pearl Harbor because this was an attack on civilians. And he also said this was an attack on all of us. It was an attack on our way of life. And he pledged that day to stand with the United States.
So what did your invoking of the alliance actually mean in practical terms?
It was a huge statement of friendship, of solidarity, of a shared determination, and it gave very public expression, something that many millions of Australians have always taken for granted, that when there's a scrap and a common cause, America and Australia will stand together. One of the things you must understand about it, many Americans, when it comes to national security, they often feel very vulnerable and alone, more than people think. They think this huge war machine, the most powerful nation the world has ever seen, why would they get worried about anything? Actually, they do, and they worry about being friendless. They don't take their predominance for granted.
Following in the footsteps of warriors who fought together in both world wars, Korea and Vietnam, Australian and American servicemen and women would once again fight side by side. First in Afghanistan, then Iraq. Not all of them would come home.
When I think about those sacrifices, of course we're standing here next to the War Memorial, and there's 102,000 Australian names written on the Roll of Honor in there. And I spent 2 years working in and around Arlington National Cemetery, where we lay our heroes to rest. And if you think about how many of the names on that wall laid down their lives next to somebody who's also laid to rest in Arlington, that's kind of chilling. That's how close our relationship is, and that's where it was. That's where it grew up in. It grew up in those fields of blood, and we owe them a tremendous debt.
The shared sacrifice in Iraq and Afghanistan forged a generation of new mateship between the Australian and American military. Unpopular as they might have been, the long spells serving out in the Middle East established skills and experience that today's US commander in the Indo-Pacific says are hard to develop in training alone.
The people-to-people ties are incredibly important. And when we talk about the values, the mutual security concerns, and our interests coming together, and then the deep relationships that are developed, whether you're on the battlefield or in headquarters together, doing the planning for those things, when they are persistent and consistent and rooted in those values, interests, and mutual security concerns, they become very alike and very powerful.
It's fascinating because the treaty itself, the actual legal document, has become less important. And the reason for this is, over the decades, Australia and the United States working together have built a new political institution and a new national security institution on the framework of the treaty. We're talking about a network of arrangements: intelligence, military cooperation, defence procurement, all sorts of interactions at the political, intelligence and military level, but beyond that, a degree of institutional trust, a really deep-seated bedrock belief on both sides, in Washington and Canberra, that we will look after one another's back.
Trust is everything. Trust is everything. And we have, 100 years of trust and close relationships with the United States. We trust each other, we respect each other, and we have, for many decades, worked very, very deliberately to ensure that we are as interoperable as possible with the United States, so that we can operate overseas and on operations seamlessly with the United States.
Today, in Australia and the US, there are regular secondments and routine exchanges at almost every level of our military, fine-tuning interoperability and building mateship. During his service with the Australian Defence Force, Major General Fergus McLaughlin spent many years working alongside our American allies.
I don't think a lot of Australians understand how deeply we are connected at a person-to-person level through the US military. Another thing that struck me is the trust that they placed in us as Australians. And there would often be a classification come up on a briefing slide that indicated no foreigners. And I would stick my hand in the air and say, look, I'd better go outside. And they'd look down and they'd, oh, don't worry, Gus, you're Australian. And it just struck me, this trust was just deep through the people in the organisation.
I can't think of anything that surpasses it. In fact, I can't think of anything in world history that surpasses it. When you consider just how tightly we are integrated, and how that integration has been built up over a series of decades, I can't think of a thing that's like it.
I've been in very close contact with my counterpart, Secretary Mark Esper. In fact, we spoke last week about many things, including how our various militaries are dealing with COVID-19, and we shared some experiences in that area. We also reaffirmed our commitment to working together in the Indo-Pacific, and particularly to help our regional neighbours get through the COVID-19 pandemic. But of course, we discussed the Marine Rotation Force scheduled for Darwin. We had postponed it, but we agreed that it should continue.
We're going to get a little bit delayed. We had to delay a little bit because of COVID-19, but they're coming. And we had a senior Marine came last year to talk to the ambassador, and one of the things that he said really stuck with me. He said, I send Marines all over the world on deployments. This is the only place I deploy them where they come back better trained than when they left.
Coming up, from the Joint Strike Fighter to Aussie ships and Five Eyes, what trust looks like, what you can and can't see.
The Alliance is brought to you by Hancock Prospecting, mates, business partners and allies.
This program is brought to you by Lockheed Martin Australia. Your mission is ours.
In today's defence world, this is what mateship looks like. Every 2 years here in Australia, thousands of American troops join us for Exercise Talisman Sabre, a prized war game designed to test every component of our defence capabilities.
So the United States and Australia have a long history of working together, and Australia and the United States provide the cornerstone of regional stability here in the Southwest Pacific. So it's really important to maintain that relationship with each other. And exercises like these give us that opportunity to work closely and to learn how each other works.
I ran the exercise in 2017 as the exercise controller. I got quite a few grey hairs out of that experience, 30-odd thousand men and women exercising in and around Shoalwater Bay. It's become really important for Australia. It's an opportunity for us to exercise at the top level of military sophistication. So you can run everything from cyber warfare serials, you'll be running space activities right down through to aircraft carriers, amphibious landings and so on. So for our troops to participate in that is enormously beneficial. We couldn't afford to put something like that together just on our own. But for the Americans, it's become a really important exercise at the same time because we're quite a capable force, and so often the Australian formations that are in the enemy force, the Red Force, really give the Americans a stern test. And so that level of shared sophistication, better than we give ourselves credit for sometimes, it's become a really important exercise in the readiness of US forces in the Pacific.
As well as our combat readiness, Talisman Sabre tests our interoperability.
We have worked very hard over the years to make sure that we train together as much as possible here and overseas to ensure that our equipment is interoperable, our standard operating procedures, and also our people know each other and they know how we operate. So we've had many decades of experience of working together, and we are almost seamlessly interoperable today.
Because we train together, because we operate together, because we come back together, do our critical debriefs together, are honest with each other, that's that complete integration that we're talking about with something like the Joint Strike Fighter.
By 2023, the Australian Defence Force will integrate at least 72 F-35 Joint Strike Fighters. It's a huge undertaking, but for many, the big investment in the program is nothing compared to the value it offers to our Defence Force and national security.
I wish there was more, we can tell Australians about how good it is. It's the best aircraft in the world and it's the right decision. I'm an Army person. I watch every dollar that goes into the Air Force and the Navy with great caution, great suspicion sometimes. But this thing is more than just a set of wings and an engine. This is a node that will move data and provide what I call machine assistance to pilots in a way that we just haven't seen before.
Well, the 5th generation Lockheed Martin F-35 is the world's most technological aircraft out there, the fighter. It also has unmatched capability, whether you're talking low observability or data distribution, as well as fusion of sensors. And it is absolutely going to be a game changer for the Royal Australian Air Force. And it will give them a transformational air capability, an air fighting capability that will be bar none, along with the interoperability across all the sovereign nations that we're partnered with and the US.
How important is Lockheed Martin's Joint Strike Fighter?
The Joint Strike Fighter is a great example of the new partnerships that Australia is engaging in around the world. The Joint Strike Fighter, again, is a partnership with the United States and a number of other countries. And Australia, 50 Australian companies are now in the global supply chain for the Joint Strike Fighter. So that's about $1.7 billion worth of revenue, yes. And that is growing.
But it is a step change, isn't it, in interoperability?
It is. That 5th generation, it is. And we are moving to 5th generation technologies across the board, including in maritime and now in land as well. So that is a step change for Australia. And again, the access that we have to American technology and American development projects cannot be underestimated. But again, increasingly Australia is offering the United States and the rest of the world a lot in return in terms of our own industrial smarts.
The ADF, and particularly the Royal Australian Air Force, is well on its way to becoming the world's first fully 5th generational Air Force. That's an astonishing feat. The Joint Strike Fighter is an integral piece of that, and because we have that level of interoperability and integration between the U.S. and America, we're going to be able to just slide right in, operationally.
The extraordinary interoperability of the F-35 program is taking trust in the alliance to new and different heights.
It's critical to the alliance. So that trust between the two nations is really what provides us the opportunity to share the technical capabilities we have, to talk about the threats we have to deal with, and to share the information, even on the research level, which is critical. That also builds ability for us to work that with defense partners down here, with the industry, with the defense forces, obviously, but understand what is needed in country and to develop that as we need to and expand it, and then also transfer that capability and that know-how so that somebody can maintain this in the future.
We know from our skies the American hardware we trust and depend upon for our defence. What is less well known is how much Americans trust and depend on Australian excellence. Over in the West, Aussie shipbuilder Austal now builds and supplies almost 15% of the US Navy. It's an extraordinary story in our bilateral relationship.
What Austal does is we really build the Ferraris of the ocean. Now, these are high-speed vessels. They're highly optimised, highly engineered for speed and for comfort. And the best design of one of those vessels is a catamaran-type vessel, and the best way to make those efficient is to make them out of a lightweight material like aluminium. So most vessels in the world, in fact almost all vessels in the world above a particular size, are made out of steel. But our vessels are made out of aluminium to make them much more efficient and therefore much faster than you would get from a steel ship. And that's what's really differentiated us from all the hundreds of other shipyards around the world.
Well, Austal is a great success story. They've been able to penetrate the US market. In fact, in some ways, I think they would argue that they've had more recognition from the Americans than they've had from the Australians. And in fact, I think President Trump, when he met the Prime Minister, gave him a replica of an Austal ship, which I thought was a bit ironic.
I think it was a tremendous gesture. It just shows the level of relationship between the countries that should happen, and how Austal is a kind of conduit for one part of that part of that relationship.
Austal design excellent range of craft for the military, from smaller patrol boats, for example, the Guardian class, which we're gifting to the region for their maritime security, through to our own Cape class vessels, of which we have just ordered another 6 for the Navy, and operated by Border Force, right through to large-scale littoral ships that the United States are operating. They design some of the world's best ships.
These unique design features and cutting-edge capabilities that Austal developed at its shipyard in Mobile, Alabama, propelled the US Navy to make a big order.
So we have active contracts to build 33 large vessels for the United States Navy, 19 littoral combat ships and 14 expeditionary fast transport vessels. So it's 33 vessels in total. Against the current size of the United States Navy, that's nearly 15% of the entire US Navy, which would have been built by Austal. And it's particularly of pride to us that LCS 30, which is the 15th vessel that we will build, is named the Canberra. I think the only ship in the United States Navy that is named after a foreign capital city. And is sponsored by Maurice Payne, who is the Foreign Minister, of course, in Australia. It's a unique position between Australia and the US, facilitated by the program that we have with the US Navy.
We have 2 littoral combat ships, the USS Gabriel Giffords and the USS Montgomery, operating out of Singapore right at this very moment. They're 2 ships made by Austal. And on a personal note, my own wife, Tracy, is the sponsor of the USS Kansas City, which we expect to commission quite shortly. So we're very proud of that platform, and I look very much forward to seeing more of them in the Western Pacific.
I think there are huge opportunities in the United States. You know, Congress has required that the United States Navy increases from its current size to a fleet of 355 ships in the future. That's around about a 20% increase to where they are today, and that the type and style of ship may well change over time with a more distributed type of network of ships. So this is relatively smaller ships, but more of them. That fits uniquely into Austal's capability. And I think one of the real areas that we're focused on as a company is the unmanned autonomous ship programs in the US. It wouldn't be a surprise to anyone that navies around the world are moving towards autonomous and unmanned vessels, and that the United States Navy is leading in that capability. And we in Austal are very involved in design processes both in the US and back here in Henderson around the technologies for doing exactly that. I think the future of naval warfare will be a number of manned vessels and then a much larger number of unmanned vessels which support those programs. We see that in the air domain, we see it in the land domain. I'm sure we're going to see it in the sea domain as well.
To unlock defence capabilities like autonomous vehicles and all things 5th generation, one factor is vital: a secure communications and data network. Protecting that network is where trusted alliance partners like Verizon have a crucial role to play.
They trust us with their business. One of the key points of differentiation for us has been the security offering that we provide in Australia. So when you think about the importance of protecting data, protecting networks, has been something that that we do well, and we take a lot of pride in doing that for the people of Australia.
And as 5G penetrates our lives and social order, cybersecurity in the national interest takes on a new level of strategic importance.
Now, I think it's open source information that when the Russians invaded Georgia, they preceded their physical invasion with attack in cyberspace. So they disrupted traffic lights, they disrupted communication systems, and they created chaos ahead of their invasion. So the reconnoitering of various systems is underway right now. And I think it's fair to say that the intellectual property norms have gone out the window, and those who leave open their intellectual property secrets are losing them in a contest as well. So this is a big challenge for Australia.
We've seen an increase in cyber threats and known cyber breaches on what we call industrial control systems. So they're the systems that might control city grid traffic monitoring and things of that nature. So that is an area that is increasing. Australia represents one of the most important cyber security markets for us internationally. We have one of 9 specialised cyber detection and response centres right here in Australia, serving Australian government and enterprise customers as well as global customers.
All over the world, the dark side of cyber works in covert partnerships, sharing sinister secrets to gain control of everything from supply chains to airports and personal information. On the other side, the alliance must collaborate with their trusted partners to keep up.
The partnership or the alliance between the United States and Australia is founded on decades of shared economic and technology leadership. Certainly from a technology perspective, it's in the areas such as cybersecurity and technology innovation. And when you talk about big data and artificial intelligence and big data analytics, that really sits at the front of the innovation cycle for many organisations. So there's great advantage for Australia and the United States to share information founded on that basis of trust that has been built over many decades between not just individual enterprises, but the governments of the two countries as well.
China is front and center for everybody right now, in particular, given what's happening with the coronavirus. And how do we really make sure that we're aware of the globe becoming a very small place? We've taken a pretty strong position in terms of networks. And we have chosen not to put Huawei into our networks. That's been an intentional and purposeful decision for us.
In July 2019, Australia made the same purposeful decision. In fact, Australia was the first of the Five Eyes partners, which includes the US, the UK, Canada and New Zealand, to rule against Huawei, banning the 5G provider from our network.
Chinese citizens and Chinese companies must follow directives from Chinese intelligence agencies. It is very black and white.
I was very proud of Australia's leadership on that issue. This is a contest over proliferation and standards, and I think Australia's position to put a stop to that was very sensible.
If we had allowed Huawei to participate in 5G, what threat would that have been to our 72 Joint Strike Fighters?
Indirectly, the Americans might choose at some point to withdraw access to some of the most highly classified functions of the Joint Strike Fighter. At the end of the day, it's their choice around some of those things. So that ability to operate in what the top secret space around some of these systems is done on agreement. The Five Eyes network of countries that describe that Anglo group, that's an incredibly rare level of cooperation in history, to have people share intelligence to that level. So to be in that group is a privilege.
Just this week, Britain has signalled that its government may also ban Huawei from its 5G build.
When we look at kind of allies in the cybersecurity defensive world, we're looking to see how is it that we line up with the same ideas, values, and interests, and then how does that help with ensuring that we can continue sharing information?
I think it's really important as we think about those decisions that we have good cross-communication around the world on some of these principles of making sure we're building networks not only for today but for the future, and that we're building them with security at the center.
Coming up, the alliance in a time of an expanding China, the battle for free hearts and minds.
The Alliance is brought to you by Austal, Australia's global shipbuilder.
At Verizon, we keep companies ready for what's next. When it comes to digital transformation, we're here and we're ready. The Alliance is brought to you by Verizon.
We are not happy with China. We are not happy with that whole situation.
We have a very different relationship with China today than what we did 10 years ago. We have different leadership in China. It is more assertive.
The nature of the Chinese Communist Party now, I think, has become clear as a result of this coronavirus.
It was making calculated steps to work out how it could emerge from this crisis more successful than anyone else.
There is trouble with the Middle Kingdom. Even before the coronavirus pandemic killed hundreds of thousands of people, crippling economies and destroying lives, the two world superpowers were already openly hostile. You talk about the great strategic competition of our times. What do you mean by that?
China. The Chinese government. Our concern is not the Chinese people. Our concern is about the current government of China and the Chinese Communist Party and the malign influence that they're increasingly exercising in the region and throughout the world.
US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has accused China of exploiting the crisis and laid the blame for the virus squarely at its door.
This is an enormous crisis created by the fact that the Chinese Communist Party reverted to form, reverted to the kinds of disinformation, the kinds of concealment that authoritarian regimes do. The Australians agree with that. You hear the Europeans beginning to say the same thing. I think the whole world is united understanding that China brought this virus to the world.
I think this is a very dangerous situation. I think it will get more dangerous. And this strategic competition between them is now deep-seated across the board. It's about who's got the best system, whether America's system or China's system is the best to handle the virus and the best to succeed in economic terms, in technological terms, in strategic terms. Now, I don't think we're on the verge of war. I don't think we're close to war. But we are clearly going down the path of a very dangerous strategic competition, the end point of which is very hard to predict.
This song, One Sea, broadcast throughout the Philippines, is part of a new face mask diplomacy by China, positioning itself as a PPE saviour. After years of engagement in the Middle East, chasing the dragon in the Pacific is now much harder for the alliance partners.
What happened was that the United States took its eye off Northeast Asia. President Obama was busy in the Middle East, busy in Afghanistan, busy in Iraq, busy with Islamic State.
You know, we've got to remember they were fighting two wars. We can explore the wisdom of that another time, but so there was always going to be it was like a magnet in a bucket of iron filings. It just drew their attention and their resources into that theatre. In a period of 4 years, it roughly took the coalition government writing the Defence White Paper, integrated investment plan. The Chinese in the same period created sand islands in the South China Sea. So, you know, in terms of tempo of action and operation, you know, this is a new contest.
The South China Sea is now one of the most contested waters in the world. 1/3 of all global shipping passes through the South China Sea, and international cables run along the seabed, vital for communication. The need for cooperation between the alliance and like-minded partners in the region is imperative.
I've had the honor of sharing our vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific, a place where sovereign and independent nations with diverse cultures and many different dreams can prosper side by side and thrive in freedom and in peace.
I really think there's been a remarkable shift in the last 3 years under the Trump administration, but it's a bipartisan shift here in Congress that says, you know, Indo-PACOM is where it's at and where it's going to be. That's going to be the priority for decades to come.
But peace is under threat. Within the alliance, there's a growing concern at China's grey zone activities under President Xi Jinping. Reports of local ship sinkings and coercive behaviour onshore.
Obviously, the situation in Hong Kong is the most dramatic example of that. You know, the approach that China takes towards democratic freedoms that, again, I think are the core of our alliance together that just, again, has created a new moment that we've really got to raise our game.
To push back China's growing influence, the United States leads FONOPS, Freedom of Navigation Operations in the South China Sea. Responsibility for preserving such freedoms in the Pacific falls to the commander of Indo-PACOM, Admiral Philip S. Davidson.
The United States is interested, as I think all the nations on the rim of the South China Sea should be, in a free and open waterway. And I think your takeaway from our activities over the last several weeks is that we're very focused on ensuring that freedom. We do so not only through our routine freedom of navigation operations, but most importantly, our work with our allies and partners in the region.
Just look at what happened late last month. We had HMAS Parramatta operating in close formation with two of our ships going through contested waters, making a statement that the international, the maritime commons, the rules-based order, that matters to U.S., Australia. Frankly, it matters to every country in the region, because that is the engine that has driven the growth and the prosperity and the security of really the entire region. And having the U.S. and Australia out there together, sort of making that statement that this is important to us, that's powerful.
This is not about two destroyers, passing other destroyers in that waterway. This is about the trillions of dollars of goods and financial information, goods that travels by sea, financial information that travels by cables underneath that sea.
Australia supports America's action in the regions, but we're not all the way with the USA. We don't at the moment go into the 12 nautical mile zone of China's reclaimed islands. We are, after all, a smaller regional player with very different views on just how far to push our major trading partner. However, on April 19, it was Australia that took the lead, calling for a full investigation into the origins of the virus, a move that enraged Beijing and unleashed the wolf warriors. The editor of the Chinese Global Times called Australia gum stuck to the bottom of China's shoe. And in Canberra, China's ambassador undiplomatically threatened a punishing boycott of Australian goods and services, from agricultural exports to students. We approached the Chinese embassy for an interview with the ambassador, but did not receive a reply.
We're not a country that wears its flag on its sleeve. We're not a outwardly patriotic country. However, if we're threatened, we're a pretty determined country. And it was I thought, somewhat foolish of the ambassador to speak in the terms he did.
What the Australian government is doing is completely unremarkable. We are standing our ground on our values and the things that we know are always important.
On May 18, China slapped an 80% import tariff on Australian barley. Admiral, Australia appears to be paying economically at the moment for taking a lead on the banning of Huawei or a push for an inquiry into the origins of the coronavirus. What's your message to ordinary Australians?
Well, my message to ordinary Australians is this, the sovereignty of our nations, our ability to choose should be independent of coercion. And sometimes that makes for tough choices. I applaud Australia's leadership on both the issues that you cited, and I know that the United States will be alongside.
The nightmare scenario for Australia, for America, and for their allies is a conflict between the US and China over Taiwan.
The Americans are obliged by, acts of the law in their country to mutually support Taiwan. We aren't. So we've always said you would make independent assessments of the nature of that behaviour. That said, I think China's looking at Taiwan in a very different way after the Hong Kong unrest. But that doesn't mean they won't continue to set the conditions to be able to act militarily if and when they think that might be appropriate. And I have to tell you, every year that goes past, China's modernisation is really significant and effective. I wouldn't like to be an active military planner trying to counter or retake Taiwan under those circumstances. I'm happily retired, Ticky.
The alliance defence strategy is largely conventional. Neither the US nor Australia is looking to deploy US nuclear weapons to Australia. But with the rise of China, some in the strategic community see nuclear deterrence as on the table for discussion, potentially at this year's OSMIN meetings in the United States. Other wargame scenarios explores China's A2AD, Air Access Area Denial, where Chinese missile capability could reach as far as Guam in the Pacific. And yes, some of these scenarios paint a US defeat, and deliberately. This is all about reshaping strategy for the alliance into a nimble, unpredictable force, which also relies on our regional partners. Coming up, alliance building, how relationships with our neighbours will make or break the strategic balance.
This program is proudly brought to you by Brickworks Building Products, inspiring the built environment with sustainable, beautiful products that last forever.
At Verizon, we keep companies ready for what's next. When it comes to digital transformation, we're here and we're ready. The Alliance is brought to you by Verizon.
Brothers in arms since World War I, Australia is the only country to have served alongside America in every major conflict since World War II. Iraq, Afghanistan, Korea and Vietnam. Today, with the rise of China, it's not about war, it's about keeping the peace, especially in our Asia-Pacific region. What both the United States and Australia would like to see now is a broadening of the alliance that values democracy above all.
China's our largest trading partner too, just like it's Australia's largest trading partner. We would like to see China back on side, but to get them back on the side, we're going to need situational alliances, if you will, of like-minded partners, India, Japan, Indonesia, Australia. Those are countries that, in addition to the United States, that can show additional leadership.
I think those other countries are going to be very welcome, and they have the capabilities and some of the technology to be able to join us.
So we're talking what countries like Japan, South Korea?
Both in the area of Asia, yes, because they have similar capabilities and similar systems that we will be able to actually help each other with and distribute the information and what we need to do with it when we get it.
And Taiwan?
Yes, absolutely.
A critical part that Australia will play in this mission is strengthening ties with our closest neighbour, Indonesia, hard hit by the coronavirus.
Well, I have been in contact with General Campbell, the chief of the Australian Defence Force, quite frequently. And he's mentioned Indonesia to me, and the United States is watching the COVID spread there in Indonesia quite closely as well. The United States has been a contributor of personal protective equipment there and stands in support. Should Indonesia need any support, we would certainly be partnered with Australia on any planning that it would do.
The idea of a bigger alliance assumes one very important group of nations are on side, our neighbours in the South Pacific. Our family, as the Prime Minister calls them. But here, China has also been busy.
I think China's activities in Oceania and the Pacific Island chain have been quite pernicious. That's been going on for years. And I think during this very serious time of the COVID-19, I think that pernicious approach has become even more evident. We continue to see a number of corrupt activities in the economic sphere, and I think from Australia's own experience, just over the discussion of barley tariffs in the last few weeks, you can see how China is running a very coercive diplomatic routine. It's abhorrent, and the nations, all of us, that are interested in a free and open Indo-Pacific should be opposed to that kind of pernicious conduct.
In this trusted alliance, it's clear that America depends on Australia's special relationships with the island nations.
Australia is a Five Eyes partner, our most trusted Five Eyes partner. It occupies important lanes in the road in the defense and intelligence fields. We trust Australia to occupy those lanes in the road so that we don't have to. We trust Australia absolutely.
We do this, and we have done this for many decades, because we value our friendships and our relationships with our friends or sovereign nations in our region, and that continues. So for us, it's not about choice. It's not about saying you must choose between one nation or another. It is really us genuinely respecting the sovereignty of countries in our region and offering to work together, as we have done for many decades.
As China steps up its influence,
The alliance message is that its regional support is long-standing and does not come with strings attached. Take 2016, when HMAS Canberra came to the rescue in Fiji after Cyclone Winston.
That was a game changer in Fiji. So our relationship, which had been prickly to say the best since the coup, almost normalised overnight.
Because previously there had been a lot of Chinese involvement in Fiji.
And we were seeing Chinese rifles equipping the Fiji Defence Force. And, those sort of fundamentals really send alarm bells. But the contest is ongoing, and we heard the story recently of after the cyclone in Vanuatu, an Australian C-17 unable to land because there was a Chinese aid aircraft already on the tarmac. Now, whether that aircraft remained there maliciously, mischievously, or if it was an accident, but the signal is of a contest of two countries seeking to get there and help a partner and remain a partner.
Recently, the alliance partners have been helping at Manus Island, which has a deep water port.
For the Papua New Guineans, yes, it is a Papua New Guinean base, and we are working on new facilities there to support the Guardian class, the Ted Dero, which we have gifted to Papua New Guinea. So it is a sovereign asset and a sovereign capability.
Yes, the US and Australia agreed to partner on the development of Manus, beginning with immediate Papua New Guinean security concerns. And we're still in the exploratory stage of what might be possible there at Manus, but we're working quite transparently together.
I think the difference in where the relationship is going into the future is there's much more of a focus on this part of the world. The Indo-Pacific region in particular, and the United States are an irreplaceable component to the strategic balance which exists within the Indo-Pacific for no other purpose to have peace and stability, and so all the countries of the Indo-Pacific can simply go on and get on about becoming stronger, both economically and within their own security.
Of course, all of the alliance posture, from big guns to white boats, costs money. And President Trump has called time on underwriting NATO nations to defend the free world.
Because the United States has been paying a tremendous amount, probably 90% of the cost of NATO. And now people are going to start, and countries are going to start upping their commitments.
This is not just Donald Trump's view. This is a permanent change in the United States strategic outlook. So whether it's a Republican president or a Democratic president, America, particularly after this economic crisis arising from the virus, America is going to expect its allies to do more. We have to do more. And that's going to put enormous pressure on this country. It's going to put enormous pressure on our resources.
Is the government committed to, in absolute terms, dollar terms, not shrinking?
Yes. Yes, we are. So in terms of the 2% of GDP and in the absolute terms of the $200 billion over this 10-year funding envelope, we are absolutely committed.
The Australia-US alliance underpins our national security. But there's also a growing view that Australia should do more to boost its own defence posture. Now, within that, here in Canberra, the advice from experts differs, from ASPI's Peter Jennings to defence mandarins like Dennis Richardson. Remember, the budget has been smashed by COVID-19, and there are these competing interests now, from the pointy end of defence to what the military can do in situations like fires or indeed the coronavirus, and our resilience. Think about the money for jobs in defence. It's quite a balancing act. It makes the support of our regional partners all the more valuable. But most valuable of all is our bond with the Americans through the alliance, an alliance anchored in trust built over many years by those brothers in arms.
There's not a day goes by in this country, Australia, where we should not give thanks for American sacrifice in the Pacific from December 1941 to the end of the war. 300,000 American casualties, 103,000 American dead, half their bodies never found. We are Americans and Australians, people who are committed to political, economic and religious freedoms, ascribing to those words at the Jefferson Memorial from the American Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among these life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness, and that governments are instituted amongst men to uphold those rights.
In Part 4, the extraordinary reach of the alliance in technology and know-how. Global giants and tech intelligence taking the alliance to new frontiers.
The Alliance, proudly brought to you by Visi. Packaging for the food and beverage industries to keep our supermarkets open.